Good afternoon and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, September. Can you believe it's already September 1st? My name is Drew Clark and I'm the editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast. And all of you who are with us here on Zoom, thank you. Also, all of you who are with us on Twitter or Facebook or on YouTube or on Broadband Breakfast where we restream this. Thank you for being here and for being with this very impressive group of panelists that we were able to get today. Before I introduce our topic, I do want to say that we've been doing these weekly events, Broadband Breakfast Live Online, for a year and a half now since the start of the pandemic. We feel we've played some small role in connecting people who are focused on better broadband, better lives. And we are very excited to announce, as we have previously, but to emphasize to the group who's here with us today and others that we are about to launch in-person Broadband Breakfast Club for lunch events. They will take place on the second Wednesday of each month. Those of you who have been to Broadband Breakfasts will know that it's an in-person event. We've done in-person events. We're doing Broadband Breakfast for lunch. Please register, sign up to attend and come to Clyde's of Gallery Place at 11:30. And then our program will begin at 12 noon. We're going to live stream it. So we've done events in person, we've done events online, and we're going to combine them for the first time. And very excited that our first in-person event will be a special conversation with the CEO of Legato Networks, Doug Smith, and also the president and CEO of the Competitive Carriers Association, Stephen Barry. So that will be next Wednesday, September 8th. Again, if you are not in Washington, you can still join us remotely, but we hope if you are in Washington, you'll register and attend. Now, of course, we're able to do our programs through the support of our sponsors and through Broadband Breakfast Club members, which we hope everyone here will become. Our sponsors are Utopia Fiber, Lit Communities, Positron Access, California Emerging Technology Fund, Powerhouse Networks, 5G for 12 Gigahertz Coalition, Samsung, Render Networks, and Broadband Now. Very grateful for the support of each of these organizations and for those of you who have gone ahead and signed up for the Broadband Breakfast Club special offer. We're continuing our special offer. It's $49 a month. For that, you get Broadband Breakfast for lunch. It may be true that there's no such thing as a free lunch, even if it is a broadband breakfast for lunch, but that is included in your membership in Broadband Breakfast, as well as my weekly exclusive columns that I send out every Friday, as well as the best discount available for broadband communities that's upcoming in September in Houston, Texas, and our program will be live streamed, as well as special invitation-only events and other opportunities to interact with the Broadband Breakfast Club members. So that's just my little message to each of you. Those of you who would like to know more, just go to broadbandbreakfast.com/join for more information. We're going to have other programs on the 15th, the 22nd, 29th, et cetera, and we'll be returning again with another in-person event in October. But we hope to see you either live or in person at these events. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests for today's event. We are very, very grateful to have with us here today, and I'm going to introduce them in the order in which they'll speak, to have Gary Bolton, who is the president and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Gary's a prior guest. Thank you for returning and being with us again, Gary. And following Gary will be Jonathan Adelstein. Jonathan is president and CEO of the Wireless Industry Association. Jonathan appeared at a prior Broadband Breakfast Club event, but it was when we were in person and when he was the administrator of the Rural Utility Service. But really grateful to have him. And thank you also, Jonathan, for agreeing to be on our virtual panel September 27th as part of the digital infrastructure investment event. Following Jonathan will be Chip Pickering, the CEO of INCOMPAS. He's also been with us at these events before. And we are pleased to have, for the first time, Molly O'Leary, Director of Government Affairs for Ntca, the Rural Broadband Association. Welcome, Molly. Thank you for being with us. And batting cleanup on our 5-person batting team will be Matthew Polka. Matt is the President and CEO of ACA Connects. I still think of you as the American Cable Association, but I know I shouldn't, Matt. So that's the origin, as I understand, of the ACA, now America's Communications Association. So with that, I just want to turn it over to Gary. Some of the inspiration and genesis for this session came from a report, which I will send in the chat window for those who are in Zoom, that we did following up on the passage of the Senate's infrastructure bill, where it stands in the House. And we are looking forward to having, at a future date, Chairman Mike Doyle, Chairman of the Subcommittee on Communications in the House. And I know he's got some thoughts on this process too. So that's what we want to talk about, is what happens next. Now that the $65 billion measure has passed the Senate, there's other items in play in the House that haven't yet completely been resolved. There has been a committed vote by September 27th on this topic, but there's still questions about how and what the House will be voting on. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Gary, and please give us your perspective on this.
Well, thanks, Drew. I really appreciate you guys having me. And I just want to start by saying that we are at a historic, what I'll call an FDR moment. You know, our industry really has a tremendous opportunity for meaningful change for the future, for generations to come. You know, the pandemic, has proven that broadband is no longer a luxury, but mission critical for digital equity and the advancement of humanity. You know, so first, I'd like to congratulate the bipartisan group for taking on such a challenging task and producing a product that will take major strides in getting fiber to every American and bridging the access, adoption, and affordability gaps. You know, we're heartened by the House setting a date later this month to consider the legislation, and we urge them to enact the bipartisan infrastructure deal as soon as possible. If all goes well, I think we should see a big signing ceremony as early as mid-October. You know, so while this bill is relatively detailed, for instance, unserved and underserved areas are defined as 25/3 and 100/20 respectively, and build-out speeds are set at a minimum of 100/20, it gives a lot of discretion to NTIA and the states to implement these programs. So there's a lot of key issues in play. First start with broadband mapping. It's a threshold requirement for new deployment programs. So the FCC, Jessica Worson also had announced that they had assigned a consultant to work on the mapping. And so as part of the Broadband Data Act, they're going to produce more granular and accurate maps. So when is this work going to be complete? Is it going to happen in the middle of next year so it can sync up with the NTIA's release of the Notice of Funding of Opportunity? Also, NTIA is going to need to approve the state's 5-year action plans, which will give it an opportunity to ensure that states most effectively use their funds. So, how will you exercise this authority? States in developing their action plans are going to have numerous tasks and choices, such as how much funding should go to deployment, adoption, and other needs. How will it structure the challenge process to ensure areas are underserved? What type of competitive process it will use to award grants, the priorities in making awards. NTI is also oversees $1 billion middle mile program, and it's going to get another $2 billion for the tribal broadband program. As you know, the $1 billion program, the grants were due today, the applications due today. The bill's adoptions are also critical. It's like one provision extends the FCC Emergency Broadband Benefit Program with $14 billion in new fund. It's renaming that to the Affordability Connectivity Program. Another provision creates 2 digital equity programs for NTIA to oversee and provides over $2 billion in funding. Finally, there are just many issues beginning to be discussed. For instance, How will new programs mesh with current federal, state, and local broadband deployment and adoption programs? What will the FCC report to Congress on the future of Universal Service Fund look like? So I'll stop there, but as you can see, that's, while there's some details, there's a lot of things still left to be worked out.
Thank you very much, Gary, and your remarks do highlight how many things are going on. I mean, just keeping track of what's where and when is a full-time role, right? In fact, in my column just last Friday for Broadband Breakfast Club members, I highlighted 3 other broadband programs. All, are significant, would be even more significant were it not for this 65 billion effort going on. And these, of course, are the minority connectivity pilot program, the tribal broadband program. You mentioned $1 billion, $2 billion more would come from this bill that has not yet passed, and also the broadband infrastructure program that are kind of, deadlines have passed on one of those. Now, tribal deadline today, minority broadband deadline later. Anyway, it's a one thing to keep track of all this, but also to address what are the live controversies that may still be in play. And I've been putting a couple notes and comments in the chat from this article. Hopefully others will address that. Again, not trying to overwhelm people, but just want to get some stuff on the table so we can talk through some of the issues. Now, let's turn to Jonathan Adelstein. Please tell us your perspective, the Wireless Industry Association's perspective on these funds and the state of the bill right now.
Well, thanks, Drew. I think you and Gary laid out very well the complexity of the many opportunities out there. And it's really exciting, as Gary pointed out, for the industry. I mean, this is a historic opportunity to get rural America finally overcoming the digital divide. I've been working on this since probably 1998, in the Senate and later at RUS. I'm from South Dakota, so this is something that's a great personal dedication of mine. I've spent much of my career trying to deal with this, and I've never seen this level of interest, and I'm thrilled with it. I mean, I think all these different issues are a recognition of the fact that broadband is so important in our daily lives, and more importantly, maybe to our broader economy. We basically weathered the pandemic as a result of having the connectivity that the telecommunications industry provided. The massive investments being made by our industry has allowed the economy to continue despite the incredible headwinds of offices shutting down in the disruption of the pandemic. Hence, every policymaker now realizes it's not a luxury, it's an essential element. And they're not just talking about it, they're showing their commitment through this historic package that's passed the Senate, in addition to all of the other initiatives of the FCC, RUS, across the board that you've talked about. I think the focus of today, of course, is on the Senate bill. So I'd just like to say from the wireless industry perspective, in terms of the funding provisions of the bill, I'm very happy with the way it came out. And it wasn't as easy, as it seems that we got to the place we are. I mean, basically, there was questions about whether wireless would even be eligible for funding in the bill, which should have, I think, never been even on the table. I mean, I think that the idea of setting a standard and statute that excludes opportunities for Americans to benefit from mobility, from resiliency, getting broadband more quickly, never made sense from the outset. I think that very fortunately, the bipartisan group that was working on this realized that if we want to get broadband in rural America and get it there quickly, we need all the above. We need fiber, we need wireless, we need cable. Look, I ran RUS, as you pointed out, during the Recovery Act, and we had a couple $1 billion, $3 billion total in grants and loans, and they were hard to get out the door. I mean, I got called into Vice President Biden's office because it was going out too slowly for them when I got there, and I had to wait because I waited for Julius Janikowski to get confirmed, take my seat on the FCC before I could go there. And we got it straightened out. We got the money out the door, but we barely got the money out the door. And even back then, with all the needs that we had 30 billion in applications, and only about, like I say, 3 billion were actually feasible, either technically or financially. The bulk of that was fiber to the premise. There was wireless, there was fixed wireless, there was wireless fiber combinations. If we hadn't been given the flexibility that the vice president suggested that get implemented into later rules, we wouldn't have gotten the money out the door. So it's that simple. I mean, policymakers tend to think, we'll order this, or we want it this way, or here's the best technology. We're just going to order that up like it's something you buy at the store. It's not like that. It depends, in my experience, having run one of these programs, on who applies, who's in a position to provide that service in that area, what's the best technology. And it's not just geography, because two similar geographies might have very different providers ready and able to serve, and putting together an application. And one might be very good and one might not be good. And one, a wireless might be good, and one, a fiber might be better, depending on so many circumstances, that you want to leave flexibility to the administrator of RUS or NTIA or the states in this case, to get as many different innovative approaches in the door as you can. So in all of the above strategy that was adopted in the Senate bill, it makes the most sense. They went to a 120 standard for the service level that had to be provided. And that, I think, allows for 5G to be directly funded, or to have fiber funded to the antenna, or obviously fiber to the premise if it makes sense in that community. And also, I think appropriately did a 25.3 definition of where there's unserved, so that we focus resources where they need to be and don't needlessly overbill. For purposes of today, what I'm hearing from Congress is that the House is likely to act on the Senate bill. It's a little surprising. I'm an old Senate guy, spent 15 years there. I'm not used to the House just saying we'll take the Senate bill, but we're thrilled if they do, because, and Chip might have a thing or two to say about that, having been a former House member and on the subcommittee over there, about just the lock, stock, and barrel taking a Senate bill. But for a number of reasons, it seems that's the way it's going to go. And that could change, as anything in Congress could, but we're happy with that, because we're happy where the Senate bill landed. And as Gary pointed out, there's a lot of discretion in that bill for NTIA and for the states. So the basic standards that are set in the bill, while we're happy with them, I think there's going to be a lot of discussions at NTIA and in state legislatures and state agencies across the country about how to make sure this money gets where it belongs, to unserved areas, A, and B, gets technology that will serve people quickly and effectively and efficiently, with really good applications coming in the door. What we're going to be encouraging is innovation. The idea of sending it to the states has its pluses and minuses, but one of the pluses is they're laboratories for innovation. So states should let different types of proposals come in the door, that they can explore how to creatively get the most bandwidth for the taxpayer dollar to the end user consumer. And they should consider things like whether mobility is an added advantage. They should consider, as the law requires, speed to deployment. Who can get that out there quickly? Or is it going to take 10, 20 years to get it out to them? Is it going to be something that's resilient? We just saw that in Ida. I mean, wiped out networks down there. What are the networks now that are resilient and that are providing service to consumers? What gets up and running faster is an important consideration that Congress put in. And I testified about that in June 22nd to get that done. So I hope that all comes together. There'll be a lot of back and forth, but I expect that we're going to get an historic investment, and it's going to work well for the country and for our broader economy.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I'm sure we'll have questions on some of the specifics there, but let's keep going and get everyone in the discussion. So it's turned over to you, Chip. I should have introduced you, former member of Congress. Thank you for fighting for telecom issues for all those years, and let's hear how you're reacting now that you're on the other side of the aisle, so to speak.
Well, Drew, thank you, and you've convened a great all-star panel today that really represents every part and every segment of the broadband industry. And as Jonathan talked about, starting something in the Senate and having the House pick it up. My career started in telecommunications on Senate staff. So my first love is still with the Senate. It is very encouraging to see that we're close to the finish line, with the House having a date certain of when they're going to pick up the infrastructure bill. We do believe that they will take the Senate bill and pass as is. And we think that the Senate passed bipartisan bill is something that we really need to stop and just think through how significant this is and recognize this rare moment of bipartisan consensus to really provide every American with connectivity, whether rural or urban, and to close the digital divide, as Jonathan mentioned. So this is a rare agreement, consensus, and now national commitment on broadband connectivity for all Americans. And so this is a great time for us to celebrate and just stop and relish. And all of us who are on this panel worked very diligently in this legislative effort. And so I want to commend all of my colleagues for the work that they've done to bring us to a good legislative framework. We want to recognize the Bridge Act, the authors of that really represent the framework for what is in the legislation. So Senator King and Bennett and Portman on a bipartisan basis, the unserved, the underserved, redefining broadband speeds from 25.3 now to 120. We really want to recognize the significance, though, of the priority language, that this should be scalable. It should be for advanced applications. It should go toward future proofing. And I share with Gary the view that really fiber is the foundation for all networks. So whether that is wireless and 5G, whether it is the new satellite deployments from high Earth to low Earth, whether it is small cell, or whether it is fiber to the premise and fiber to the home, the reality is for our nation to beat China in 5G, or for us to compete against the UK and Europe that are setting gigabit standards, fiber really is the O negative or the universal donor that everything comes back to fiber. And so as a nation, we have to really extend, expand, and densify fiber everywhere and for all parts. And let me just step back just real quickly and say who INCOMPAS is today. We started 40 years ago today. So we celebrate our 40th anniversary, the beginning of competition and the founding voice for competition, back when we were trying to go from monopoly policy to competition policy and long distance. And that competitive spirit has spread through all parts of our telecom and now broadband ecosystem and environment and industry. And as we go into the future of this transformational investment in broadband, we believe that competition is still the core value that brings us the most investment, the most innovation, and the greatest affordability for those consumers who are trying to connect and have the services that are critical to their future. So as we look at it, INCOMPAS today, we have Dish, who's deploying a new 5G, new entrant in wireless. We have companies like C-Spire, both wireless and fiber, Amazon that plans to deploy a low Earth satellite system. We have we share members with Jonathan with Crown Castle, that's both tower and fiber. We have Zayo that is long haul backbone transport. And then we have numerous local companies across the country that are deploying fiber to the home and fixed wireless. ZenFi is a small cell network in New York that is the largest provider of wholesale fiber and small cell. So INCOMPAS is all networks, all technologies, all business models, but we have a unified vision that we want to build the new networks of the future and not stay stuck in the past. And for us to win the competitive rivalries of our global competitors, we have to be able to build new networks. And so what are the challenges ahead as we go to the House and then to Ntca and then to the states, is to make sure that we don't subsidize the past, that we don't subsidize old networks, that we really need to move away from copper and coaxial and go to fiber, and we need to move from asymmetrical to symmetrical, and we need to go from 4G to 5G, from high Earth to low Earth, and we need to go from the networks that we really think can scale to the advanced applications of the future, whether that is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, autonomous vehicles, precision agriculture, telemedicine. So this once in a lifetime historical opportunity of $65 billion going into this new national commitment on connectivity, we need to make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, which was to subsidize the past, which was to protect against competition, which was to keep us stuck in the past versus moving to the future. So we think that we have a great opportunity with this legislation, with everybody that is on this panel, to work with the states and work with the Ntca now to future-proof our infrastructure and broadband in a way that is both competitive, pro-consumer, pro-investment, pro-innovation. And so, Drew, thank you for having us. We look forward to working and continuing this discussion is going to be, over the next year to 2 years, an exciting time for all parts of the industry and how we can collaborate as well as compete at the same time.
Well, great. And thank you both for that view of the perspective on the bill and for who INCOMPAS is, because I think it does help to answer that question of who's talking here, right? And what players are. So without any much further ado, let's go to Molly and then to Matt, 5 minutes each. So we still have plenty of time for Q&A. So Molly, we'll turn it over to you to give us the Rural Broadband Association's perspective.
Well, thank you, Drew, and I will try to keep it as brief as possible. I'm Molly O'Leary, the Director of Government Affairs for Ntca, the Rural Broadband Association. We represent nearly 850 independent, family-owned, and community-based telecommunications providers. And they deliver broadband services and other essential services to the most rural and remote parts of the country. I think much to the same of everyone speaking before, it really is a big moment. The Senate passed a $65 billion investment for broadband. It really recognizes that connectivity is a necessity. And we really think with careful implementation, like this could go a long way to connecting everyone. Of course, compromise packages, everything is not perfect. I think we were very, very vocal in wanting 100 symmetrical speeds. Current data shows households are demanding more than 120, and it's only going to grow from here. So we really want to make sure that the investments we're making are going to go to those future-proof networks that are scalable, reliable, and we do believe the bill does outline some language around that for states to implement it in that way. So we, really good compromise here, and we are, cautiously optimistic about its passage in the House and further implementation. A few other items that we had, wished to see addressed, supply chain. We've been seeing waits from a couple of weeks to, over a year for fiber, for pedestals, for customer premise equipment, kind of everything that you need to build the networks. And also issues like costly and time consuming permitting, and a few other issues that are a little bit smaller, like eligibility areas and some of the program eligibility requirements. But with that said, we commend the Senate, and we really look forward to what the House is doing. Drew, as you mentioned, it's a little bit unclear about what the House is going to do. Are they going to amend it? Or are they going to, straight up yes or no vote? Last week when we saw the House vote on the larger reconciliation package, they did adopt rules as well, and about how we would consider the bipartisan Senate infrastructure bill. And they didn't, include any or rule any amendments in order at that time. So that, if you could presumably take from that it would be maybe just an up or down vote by the 27th of September. But of course, nothing is final at this point. And we have heard from several prominent lawmakers too that they might want to see changes as well. So we'll see what happens there. And I'm sure we will cover this in the rest of our discussion. So just Drew, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. And we'll turn to you, Matt, for final opening remarks before I'll open it to questions for all of you.
Well, thanks, Drew. And on behalf of the 700 members of ACA Connects America's Communications Association, it's really great to be here on behalf of our smaller and mid-sized broadband providers that are primarily in smaller markets and rural areas all across the country. This really is a historic time for all of us, all of our colleagues here on the line that have been working on these issues for so many years. And Jonathan, I like how you focused your comments before, where you said, to have this focus and attention on rural is just terrific, because that's where our members primarily live and work. And frankly, this bill has really worked to strike a reasonable balance to do that, to serve the 12 million people who lack basic internet broadband service, as well as to help the 30 million people in our country that don't subscribe to broadband, even though it passes their homes. So I first applaud what the bipartisan group has done in the Senate to create this bill. As we've all said, I think there are things that we would like and things that we maybe don't like as much, but this is really a reasonable balance and a process that has worked to focus on adoption and deployment where it's needed most for those customers that are in unserved and underserved areas, and for those folks who don't subscribe, whether it's because they can't afford it, they can't afford either the service, they can't afford the equipment, or they just don't understand the value and importance of broadband. So the fact that Congress here in this bipartisan group in the Senate has put $42 billion aside for broadband deployment in unserved and underserved areas that will allow, frankly, gigabit service, future-proof service to be deployed in these areas to meet that need where those 12 to 20 million people exist. I think that's terrific, as well as the adoption issue where $14 billion, as we've said before, will be focused on helping people to adopt. And then $2 billion to help them better understand why this is so important. I mean, for all of us that have and we all have, we've lived through the COVID pandemic. We've seen how broadband providers of all stripes stepped up immediately as the pandemic was coming upon us to realize that, look, if our country is going to keep working, keep learning, keep moving forward, keep ability to see your doctors and be seen from a healthcare perspective, we're going to need broadband and we're going to need more of it. And we're going to need to get more people connected. So we're very, very happy to see that. As everyone has said here, the House is positioned to move this forward, and we certainly hope that they do. What's next is certainly a big question, as my colleagues have mentioned, whether the NTIA, the states, the FCC, also to see better mapping that will help to define how these programs are implemented, which we think is a great thing to have, those more granular maps that will provide more information as well as a better challenge process and be really the basis for the threshold for further deployment going forward. So as we look forward to what's next, we'll be focused on the NTIA in the states to make sure that those programs really do focus on the areas and the people that need it most. So we're looking forward to a deployment of grants through competitive and objective standards that will be used on the state level. Make sure that these programs don't overlap, but rather mesh well together with existing federal programs. But we're definitely moving in the right direction, and that's what's key. We were very happy as we worked really over the last year to be able to have some impact on this process through a report that we commissioned with a group called Cartesian, where we brought the most up-to-date, relevant, unique data, taking the most recent FCC data and other sources to really map out what is sort of a sliding scale of cost, longevity, and opportunity. And frankly, we think that had some bearing in terms of the outcome here of this reasonable balance that was reached in the bipartisan group to develop the kinds of standards that will help to meet the most people and help most people to adopt if they're not adopting today. So we're very, very pleased with that outcome. And it's a terrific report. If you haven't seen it, I know, Drew, I've sent to you the link, so feel free to share it with your viewers as well. But we're looking forward to the best opportunity that we have, and I know I've been in DC since '93, the best opportunity we have to truly close what remains of the digital divide. And we're anxious to work with all of the groups here, as well as Congress, the FCC, NTIA, and the states to make it happen.
Well, thank you to each of you for your remarks, and thank you to Molly and Matt for being brief here. So I want to dive right into the speed question. Okay, so Gary, I'm going to start with you. Okay, now, so there's a question about whether some things are settled or not settled, right? And I'm hearing a lot of, this is a good compromise, but I want to get us to focus on, well, what's wrong with the compromise, at least initially. Okay, so Gary, and as we quoted you in the piece, that you said the bill acknowledges today's definition of broadband is outdated. This bill, plus what is happening in the market, will hasten the move to symmetrical networks of 100 megabits per second and higher. So I just want you to focus on that for a moment. And I mean, is this a missed opportunity to not allow new construction of fiber networks in areas that are served by, perhaps low capacity upload networks of 15 megabits or 25 megabits, or so could speak to this point about building networks where there's lower quality networks?
Yeah, so I know you're looking for a fight here, Drew, but I mean, really what it comes out to is I thought the language was genius because it was very political. As Jonathan set out, that there were some concerns that the administration was looking for future-proof networks, and they were looking at 100 meg symmetric as kind of what the initial language was. At the end of the day, the way the language is written is that's 100 by 20 is a minimum speeds. And what we're seeing is that the market has really spoken. If you look at where Wall Street is rewarding investment is in fiber, to be able to take advantage of what wireless can deliver, it really needs a robust fiber infrastructure. And so, we all enjoy our untethered devices. And so we know that whether it's, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or 5G or whatever it is, our devices are going to be untethered. But the rule of thumb is to get it out of the air and into the ground as soon as possible. And so, I think that what we'll see, and we've already seen it with private investment, is that, these communities and where this money is deployed is going to deploy fiber everywhere they possibly can, and then leverage other technologies where they have to. And so, and then, we all want to enjoy mobility. So being able to have that robust fiber infrastructure for the future of things like 5G is critical.
So just to be clear, is the standard in the bill, the Senate bill, that there will be funding for anything that is not currently served by 25.3 or by 100 by 20?
Well, so there's a kind of the definitions of unserved and underserved, and then there's what you build. And so what the concern was, and I call it ratcheting, but if you put the unserved or underserved at too high levels, then what the concern was is that people would cherry pick and do the easier, lower cost to build areas and still leave the hardest to reach people left out. And so, there was a lot of focus on, okay, let's make sure we prioritize reaching unserved as, the old definition of 25.3, and then, being able to have underserved as 100 by 20. And so where there's a lot of flexibility is on what you use the money to build to, and that's where you see a lot of discretion with Ntca and the states, and there's a high priority on being able to deliver, those gigabit services. And so again, at the end of the day, it's kind of a moot point, because what we're seeing investment by the private sector is in fiber. And again, that's what we'll see. People will build out, especially when you're talking communities. If you look at any kind of community project, they're building out fiber because they're not looking at a propensity to spend money. They're looking at what is the right thing to be able to have economic development, jobs, and be able to, what's the right thing for the future of their community. And I'm sure that Jonathan can probably articulate this better than me. So maybe I'll let Jonathan jump in and provide some.
Well, yes, let's hear from both Jonathan and Matt on this point here. And Matt, I may be and I will share the Cartesian when I can get to it here, but I'm a little perplexed as to whether you're a fan of pushing to those higher symmetrical speeds or not. So that's my question for Matt. And Jonathan, let's hear your take on elaborating on what you told us and how you think this bill does this.
Sure. I think surprisingly, Drew, there's way more agreement here in this panel than disagreement, particularly when it comes to deployment of fiber. And I couldn't agree with Gary more about our members' interest in deploying fiber, which they're doing everywhere. I mean, they're doing it today in greenfield areas. They're looking to deploy fiber wherever they can. Regarding what came out of the bill with the 100 by 20 definition for underserved areas, I think, again, coming back to what we reported in our Cartesian report, it's really just a function of how much money is available. We looked at it and said, if we're going to serve households that lack 100 by 20, it's going to cost somewhere between $35 and $67 billion. And the Senate settled somewhere in the middle at around 42. If that number were higher, then you would be looking at a much higher number, which frankly may not have been available. So we were looking at what is the best, most efficient sense to create a standard that helps to get, again, those 12 million people that are unserved served. But by the same token, what we are doing is encouraging our members when they deploy, whether it's in 25.3 areas or 100 by 20 areas, we want you to build fiber. We want you to build gigabit systems that are future-proof, where the government doesn't have to come back and add more money to something to help expand service. We want you to build a network that will meet the needs of the communities, customers, and communities today, as well as going forward. So we're in agreement here, and I think what this bill does is reach that compromise, which we have in a legislative process in a very, very smart and efficient way. But we're all going to get to the same point, and that's deploying fiber.
Jonathan, what's your perspective on this?
I think we are in agreement that we need to drive fiber deeper into the networks. And the question becomes, where does it terminate? My view is that sometimes it terminates at the premise and sometimes it terminates at the antenna, depending on the needs of the community. And the antenna provides mobility, provides wider area coverage, provides for precision agriculture, and all the economic development needs of the community. I mean, right now you talk about symmetrical speeds, but consumers are using 14-to-1 download upload. So wireless networks are configured to meet consumer needs and not basically what's in the future. I mean, some people think it might go down to 10-to-1, maybe, but it's still incredibly asymmetrical. And so we can't design wireless networks to do that, because to do that would sacrifice download speeds that consumers actually use for upload speeds that they don't need in most cases. Now, some people do, and ideally you could get both. But the question is, do they also want mobility? Do you also want speed to deployment, getting these things built anytime soon? Do you want resiliency? I mean, we talk about future-proof. Louisiana today and see what people are using. Are they using this device? Is this the one that's more resilient? Or are they using the wiped out wireline network? Now, it's not because our industry is any more committed. It's the nature of the technology. In some places, for example, in Louisiana, you can't bury fiber. So you've got aerial fiber that's subject to hurricanes of this magnitude. There's no way around it. And you've got to repair that to every home where it's wiped out if you have fiber to the home. And on wireless, you just have to restore power to the transmission site through generators. You can't put a generator in every home, but you can put it at most transmission sites. So, there's advantages and disadvantages to technology. The key is to allow policymakers to determine what's best for their community based on who's in a position to provide that service. I testified with Molly's member, Denny Law, who's a co-op that's really well positioned to provide fiber to the home to every exchange they have in South Dakota. I think if they applied, people would say that's the right answer here. Other places, there's been much less investment than a co-op might have done, and there's a lot more needed to get that built out. And the current LEC might not be in a position to get it done anytime soon, if at all, or if they do, they might not be a stable long-term presence. So if there is a hurricane that comes through, or there's something that wipes out the network, that's not future-proof. Who's going to pay for it the second time? Meanwhile, the wireless network will be up and running. So I mean, it's very complicated. And I think the key is to allow policymakers discretion to look at innovative approaches and to look at the value of wireless in terms of resiliency, speed of deployment, and mobility.
Jonathan raised is a good point about just the download versus upload speeds. The consumer preference is more for download. Yes, we've seen much more demand for upload. And yet, one of the things that I've floated many times and will float again here is to think about the speeds as, the download times the upload speed. So 100 megabits down times 100 up would give you a score of 10,000, right? So if you think of it as they're both important, doesn't necessarily mean you need to be symmetric, but it's giving a little more credit or weight to the upload. I would love Chip and Gary and Molly's reaction to this point about, is symmetrical really as crucial as maybe some in the Biden administration were thinking early? Chip, what are your reactions?
Molly, I definitely have some opinions on that, but I'll let you go first.
But I think what we're seeing in the marketplace is today's consumer may have this disparity between upload and download, but the applications of the future and what we've seen during the pandemic is a much greater need for symmetrical service. Used to, the video transmission or the call coming in, there wasn't as much of an interactive need. What we're doing right now requires much greater capacity, upload and download, as we do this webinar. And so if you look at the applications of the future, more and more symmetrical services as the base and foundation network. And I think we're all in agreement. Sometimes fixed wireless and small cell and mobile networks, that redundancy and resiliency and complementary combination and integration of networks is all very, very good. But we do need to extend the fiber to make it as fast as possible and as symmetrical as possible over time. So I think we're all saying the same thing. The question is, how fast do we get there? We want the 120 to be a minimal, but with a priority and a preference for this greater speed, greater capacity, and more symmetrical service. And that's what we would advocate at the NTIA and at the state level, and what we think is really where the market is going.
How long would, go ahead, Molly, go ahead.
Sorry, Drew.
Catch up.
Just wanted to reiterate what Chip said there too is, yes, we're thinking about right now, right? The pandemic, we're all at home, we're using VPNs, we're all on video two-way messaging here. But we're also looking to the future. We keep doing this kind of incremental approach where at first we built a 10.1, then 25.3. We really need to aim high and do a lot better than we have and finally solve this once and for all. 100 symmetrical, really, we're talking about fiber here, and that's scalable, it's reliable, and over the long run, it's going to really be cost efficient too.
Yeah, just to kind of round this out is, if we look at the internet, we're in the third wave. The first wave was just connecting to the information digital highway, right? And so that was all downstream consumption. And then as we moved into the 2000s, we hit the second wave, which was the applications we started building on top of that. And now we're entering the third wave where it's the immersive, fabric of our lives. And so, one of the things that this whole asymmetric part was, as Jonathan said, it was just a limitation of technology, that you only had so much capacity. So you tried to skew it, from kind of, 30 years ago when we used to sit and consume stuff from the internet. And looking to the past to try to predict the future really doesn't work, because so we do things in the network today to try to mask the inability to have much upstream. Like for instance, we use rate adaptation and active queuing dropping and things like that, so that when you look at the statistics, it underreports how much upstream is trying to be used. And then as Molly points out, the future really, as you look at your Ring doorbells and everything else, who knew that your Peloton would use so much bandwidth? But, we started looking at all the devices in our home and the way that we're moving forward, and how we're all going to be able to work from anywhere, now that we're through the pandemic. You cannot really limit people's ability to innovate and to function based on limitations of technology. So it's crazy to put arbitrary limitations. And then, really this whole bandwidth thing becomes moot, because now as we started shipping more 10 gig symmetric PON technology this year than GPON. So what's actually being deployed now is 10 gig symmetric. And that's going to accelerate. And now we're already working at 25 gig symmetric and then 50 gig PON. And so these kind of speed things that we're talking about now are really a moot point. And what's really going to be important going forward is latency and other things. And so anyway, it's kind of not useful.
Well, thank you, Gary. And it sounds like, what you're saying is that the industry is moving towards this, and that may be true. But what if I'm living in an area that has very, very inadequate upload speeds? I can't get a 10 or 20 megabit upload in order to offer, real time, virtual networks, real time VPNs and virtual desktops. Those have always been very hard to do unless you've got a good, let's just say 25 by 25 or 30 by 30. So I'm just wondering, are we not going to see any of these funds rolled out until everyone in the 25.3 zone has received funds? Any quick reactions, and then we'll move to a few other topics here besides the speed one.
Well, just real quick on this, there's been a lot of talk about the need for additional upload. We haven't seen that dramatic uptick in uploads in our networks. I mean, there's been a little bit, but it's still way asymmetrical in terms of uses. And any of the uses you're talking about can be accommodated by the 20 megabit upload speed that the Senate bill accommodates today's uses. Now, future uses, again, is probably going to continue to expand. But when is wireless not kept up with consumer demand? I mean, wireless is going to continue to evolve to meet additional upload as well. And so you have all kinds of things you leave on the table if you leave out mobility and the ability of people that, do they have to go buy another device in their home that they don't want when 20% of people have cut off their wireline and are only using wireless? It's expensive for low income consumers and 20% of rural consumers that don't have it today. I mean, there's a lot of considerations that need to go into this. And so to have Congress kind of setting these limits based on something in the future that may or may not happen that doesn't appear likely today seems as it was a bit arbitrary. And right now, I mean, this Zoom call is using just a couple megabits at most for upload. You could have 5-6 people in your house with a 20 megabit upload speed doing this without any problem. So I just,
Sure, Gary agrees with you on that one there, Jonathan.
Yeah, well, a decade ago, the national broadband plan was predicated on broadband being 1 megabit. So I wonder how that we would have fared with 1 megabit during the pandemic. So anyway, I think it's a moot point to argue about this because, the future has amazing things coming forward, as Molly pointed out, and I would not want to limit our future based on what Jonathan's suggestion the network should be architected for.
And Drew, let me just add something real quickly. What Jonathan and his members and wireless can do at 120 today, and what cable can do with coaxial at 120 today, that may meet the moment today. But why we need to use funding for the future and to make it future-proof, you don't actually want to subsidize in a way that retards and disincents investing into fiber in the future and the future-proof networks and the foundation that we need for the future. Our mistake in the past is that we subsidized copper for 100 years. We cannot subsidize coax and wireless at 120 for the next 100 years. We've got to go to the future if we're going to win the race against China, against our international competitors, and have the economy, the education, the healthcare, the future that we need. We cannot subsidize the past. We have to keep going to 1 gig and make that our standard and more symmetrical over time. We want everyone to compete, but everyone to build new networks, not just stay stuck with the old networks.
The broader yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Just as the coax guy here, the quote unquote coax guy, I could tell you that our folks aren't looking back. They're looking ahead.
Exactly.
And that's what our point is the future is very bright. The technology's there. I mean, look at what the private sector has been able to do, through this pandemic to really keep our country connected, building on those entrepreneurial principles of, our smaller independent members that they've been doing for the last 50 plus years. That's going to continue. We have every incentive to want to build the very, very best fiber-based, systems that we can. But what we're talking about here is just the nature of how much money was available in this bill and what kind of standards do we need to set. I think we've started at the right place, but we're all going to go and build towards the future.
So let's talk a minute about the broader context in which this bill sits. Right now, obviously, this passed the Senate 69-30, very decisive, bipartisan. But then the same night, or just after midnight, there was another bill passed, the budget plan, which will lead to budget reconciliation, and that was, of course, by a partisan 50-49. And that is the bill that the House took up rather than this bill when they came back for their August session. And there was some debate about it with some House Democrats, moderate Democrats saying, well, we need the infrastructure bill. But no, we can't have the infrastructure bill until there is another bill, a $3.5 trillion measure that will come together, hasn't even come together yet, will over the next couple of weeks. So my question for the panel is, look, it sounds like there's still some issues that have to get sorted out. So Chairman Doyle said that he was concerned about some provisions relating to spectrum. He also said that the bipartisan packages, I sent this in the chat window to our Zoom watchers, the bipartisan packages are rarely perfect. This bill prioritizes the future, build out a future-proof network. So he was positive about that, so suggesting maybe there's not changes in store, but there are concerns about some other provisions, spectrum. There's been some concerns about some provisions regarding crypto. So how are those going to get addressed? Are they going to get addressed through, if there's no changes in the House, is there really a need to not make any changes for fear of upsetting something that overwhelmingly passed the Senate? Again, any insider baseball thoughts you have on this process would be appreciated, because I, for the life of me, can't figure out why you couldn't make some changes to one bill while putting the changes in a more controversial budget reconciliation measure.
Well, Drew, it's kind of unusual here is that you have as an old Senate guy, you have, if it goes to any changes, then the Senate has to approve those changes. And so the question is, do they want to take a chance on another Senate bill? And you'd have to have sort of an ad hoc group in the Senate, which is the bipartisan group, negotiate with the House, because this wasn't done through the regular order. It makes it for kind of a messy consideration. Not something to be said that it can't be done, but I think that's why the easier thing is just to pass the Senate bill. But they might offer amendments, and they would have to be kind of pre-baked with the Senate in order for them to be done. And I don't think that would result in any major changes in the Senate bill in terms of the broadband section or anything else that was dramatic. It would be more of a cleanup, and a cleanup could be done in a subsequent technical corrections bill. It is an unusual process, but I would say, on the reconciliation bill, one thing we all are in violent agreement on is that this is about human infrastructure, and that we don't have enough skilled labor to build out the networks that we have today, let alone if you add another 40 to 60 billion plus everything else that's being considered for broadband build out of both wireline and wireless networks. There's more work than we can possibly do without building an additional pipeline of skilled workers. So I think we all agree that the reconciliation bill needs to include something to develop the telecommunications workforce to meet the additional demand being put on by the congressional infrastructure bill.
Yeah, that was well said, Jonathan. Just if you look at our workforce, right now the amount of funding and the opportunity well outpaces the development of the workforce that actually can get this stuff deployed. So I agree 100% with Jonathan saying on where we really need to put some focus on not only the infrastructure, but the boots on the ground that can get this stuff deployed.
Chip, what are your thoughts on how these two seem to have gotten paired together, right? A very popular bipartisan measure and a very partisan reconciliation measure.
Well, the good news is that we have a date certain, September 27th, to take up the bipartisan bill in the House. So we feel very confident that there will be separation between the partisan and the bipartisan, and that we have a high degree of confidence that the infrastructure bill that the Senate passed will pass the House by the end of September. And so the things that we've been talking about today will happen. The partisan measure, if they look, there could be parts of that will make permanent the affordable connectivity program, what is today the emergency broadband benefit. We could see some additional funding. We're all on this panel in agreement that we need investment in our workforce to actually have the digital infrastructure workforce of all of our network builders to have the skilled workforce necessary to deploy the networks of the future. We're in agreement that there, and the reconciliation could be a vehicle for funding in that area, and we'd be very supportive of that. But the two things should be separate. We believe that they will be separate, and that we'll see the infrastructure bill passed by the end of September. And then hopefully we'll see a White House signing of that soon after.
Let's give Molly and Matt a chance to weigh in on this, and we are running towards the end of our time. Hour flies by, so let's hear from both of you, kind of some final statements, and if Jonathan, Gary, or Chip want to say something else, just ping me in the chat, and we'll accommodate you too. Molly, go ahead.
Well, I don't think I have too much more to add that no one else has already mentioned, but we saw in the Senate, it was a really hard fought agreement, and there was a robust amendment process, which eventually, came to an end when there were still bipartisan, really strong supported amendments on the table that got left behind because when you have an agreement like this, it's so vulnerable to falling apart. So we'll see what happens in the House. Obviously we had mentioned a few of the things that we want to change, but no insight from our side here.
Well, thanks again, Drew. I've heard a number of members of Congress call the infrastructure bill a once-in-a-generation opportunity. I don't think anybody wants to lose that once-in-a-generation opportunity. So I think I agree with my colleagues here that the House will take that up and pass it. I think there will be, lots of efforts and ideas in reconciliation. We're starting to see them bubble now on broadband and other issues. Again, given that this is a reconciliation bill, a budget bill, there are going to be, dollar limits attached in many ways that each committee will have a pot so much to work with. And, there's lots of other issues besides broadband, for instance, in our energy and commerce world, whether it's climate change or healthcare or other things like that. And, then you get to the question, well, how do you apportion the money that might be, going through energy and commerce? So I think it suffices to say that we will see ideas. Maybe we'll see some ideas there for expanded, monetary support for the emergency connectivity fund, for remote learning, things of that nature. But then it'll come down to a process of what's really doable. But we are going to be looking at every one of the ideas, working with members of Congress, sharing our views as well. But at the end of the day, working to get everybody connected.
Well, with that will have to be the last word. Before I thank our panelists, I want to remind you that next Wednesday, September 8th, we will be having Broadband Breakfast for lunch. So we urge you to register and join to attend Clydesdale Gallery Place, 11:30 in the morning, and then we will live stream at 12 noon. Also want to thank our sponsors, each of them, for participating and helping to make our programming possible. And don't forget, later this month, digital infrastructure investment on September 27th in Houston, Texas, and online. Thank you to those who have signed up for that and for those who agreed to participate. Looking forward to seeing you again, Jonathan Adelstein there. And thank you to each of our panelists for today. On behalf of Gary Bolton, Fiber Broadband Association, Jonathan Adelstein, Wireless Industry Association, Chip Pickering, INCOMPAS, Molly O'Leary of Ntca, and last but not least, Matt Polka. Glad we could finally get you on our program of ACA Connects. I'm Drew Clark, Broadband Breakfast. See you next week in person. Take care.
Drew, thank you.